Welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Hannah Blackwell, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my ultimate guide to fantasy romance. This is really exciting for me. I've wanted to do a video like this for a very long time. Fantasy romance, or as some people call it, romantasy. Yes, I know there is a debate about whether fantasy romance and romantasy are the same thing. I personally believe they are. I personally believe romantasy is just a more hashtagable, searchable way to market fantasy romance. Romantasy has become very, very popular. We're seeing more and more romantasy or fantasy romance in the bookstores these days, but fantasy romance has been around for a very long time. There's all kinds of subgenres, and today I'm going to be talking about fantasy romance as a more widespread umbrella for speculative romance. Before we get into that, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I'd love for you to do so. Don't forget to click the like button and comment down below. Let me know, is fantasy romance and romantasy the same thing? Is it? All of my social media is linked down below in the description, including my Goodreads, Instagram, Patreon, and the link to the Hideaway Discord. With all that out of the way, let's get into this video. First, what is fantasy romance? Like I said, I want to talk about fantasy romance as an umbrella for a number of different types of speculative romance. So when you're talking about a speculative genre in the regular terms, you're talking about fantasy, sci-fi, some horror, basically things that don't necessarily actually exist in our real world. Some of the most popular beings in fantasy romance include fae, elves, witches, shifters, gods and goddesses, demons and angels, vampires, dragon riders, sirens, mermaids, monsters, aliens, and just miscellaneous magical beings. There are all sorts of different settings, from modern day and urban fantasy or historical fantasy, maybe folktale retelling, or a magical mystical realm, which is what we think of when we're thinking of classic fantasy books. Today I'm going to be recommending 25 fantasy romance books, but I'm going to be separating them into these categories: popular fantasy romance books, spicy fantasy romance, slow burn fantasy romance books, dark fantasy romance, why choose, cozy fantasy romance books, which in this video are not going to be spicy, paranormal, monster, and alien romance books. So because I do have 25 books to discuss and recommend to you within these subgenres, let's just get into the recommendations. I am going to try to discuss the different magical beings that are in these books when I go through very short synopses of them. Also, I just wanted to let you know that all of these books are adult. I don't read a lot of YA. There are a couple of new adult books, but if you are looking for YA fantasy romance books, I can leave down a couple of recommendation videos from some other booktubers that you might be interested in. So the first book here actually started as YA, but got moved into the adult section of bookstores, and it is also probably the most famous fantasy romance of all time, and that is Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in an ongoing series. It has not completed yet. We are all very, very excited for the next installment. I'm hoping it will be coming out in 2025. But this first book follows Farah, and this is a fantasy romance involving fae. In this world, the humans and the fae are separated by this wall, and no one passes it. Humans are really scared of the fae, and the fae apparently don't really have much respect for the humans. She is a human, her mother has passed away, and her father really isn't helping out enough. She's got 3 sisters, and they all seem to be relying on her to support the family. One day she's out hunting, and she accidentally shoots a wolf, and it turns out that wolf is a fae. The king of the spring court takes her away in exchange for one of his fae sentries that she shot. And so, as you can tell already, this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. If you're looking to dive into the fae fantasy realm, definitely try this one out. But if you've already read this and are looking for more, I have some more recommendations coming up for you. Next, I have another new adult series, and it is involving fae. This is the Zodiac Academy, and this is by Carolyn Peckham and Susan Valente. This is a very popular fantasy romance series. It was one of the first that you saw was indie published and got picked up by a publisher and was all over the bookstores. This feels to me like almost a Harry Potter retelling, but with fae, and the magic involves the stars and the zodiac system. The main characters are Darcy and Tori Vega, and they are living in the human world when one day they get pulled into the magical Fae realm, where they find out they're the long-lost heirs to this Fae realm. So they're sent to the Zodiac Academy, where they discover there are 4 families that have been ruling in their stead, and they each have heirs that are attending the Zodiac Academy. These 4 heirs are not happy to see our heroines, and so they bully them very heavily. Make sure you check out the trigger warnings before going into this. This starts out as a bully romance, but eventually once you get into book, I don't know, 3 or 4, the bullying stops and the romance really gets heavy. I love this series. I am on book 6. These books get very long. There's 9 books in the series, so it's definitely an investment of time if you want to pick up this series. Okay, so the third book that's very popular is Fourth Wing. This took the world by storm last year, and the second book was actually released at the end of the same year as the first book being released in 2023. And this is by Rebecca Yarros, and this is a dragon rider fantasy romance. Our heroine has a physical disability. She ends up thrust into this dragon rider academy. She doesn't think, like her whole life, she doesn't think she's going to be sent there. She thinks she's going to be working in like the archives, but she gets sent to become a dragon rider. This academy is so deadly. Even just to get into the academy, you have to walk on this balance beam type wall across this mountainous cavern where it's really windy and people are trying to push you off, and basically very few people survive this academy. She meets someone who she thinks is her enemy, and they quickly develop this enemies to lovers romance. I don't think this is very slow burn. It's much more a quickly developed romance, but it is enemies to lovers, and it's very political. I still need to finish the second book in this series because I was much more a fan of the first book than the second one, and I think that has been a popular consensus. Okay, so now if you are looking for some spicy fantasy romance, though there is definitely spice in the other 3 I discussed, I wanted to talk about Quicksilver by Callie Hart. This is a fantasy romance involving Fae. When we start out, our heroine, she knows she might have a little bit of magic or some kind of weird ability involving metals. She lives in this desert city. It's very hot. The queen who is in charge is pretty evil. She rations water, and our heroine lives in this section of the city that's quartered off because the queen says that they have a disease, when in reality they are really just poor and struggling to survive. Our heroine steals something from one of the queen's guards and ends up being arrested. When she's arrested, she falls through this portal and shows up into this icy, wintry Fae realm, and there she meets the hero. She finds her powers. From there, the 2 of them have to work together for the Fae King, and I'm not going to go into details much further than that. I loved this book, and it's very spicy and steamy. You really believe the chemistry between these 2 characters, and like I said, super, super spicy. Really, really good. I can't wait for the second book in this series to come out. Another very spicy Fae fantasy romance is What Lies Beyond the Veil by Harper L. Woods. This is similar to ACOTAR in that there is a wall that is dividing the Fae from the humans. Our heroine is on the human side. One day the wall falls. The Fae who is supposed to be her mate is now chasing her, and she's trying to escape him because she's scared of the Fae, who are supposed to be really evil. This one is probably the spiciest fantasy romance book I have read that is also epic in world building and in plot. It's very political, but when you are looking at the actual chemistry between the hero and the heroine, oh my goodness, it is so good. So, so good. The spice is on point with this one. The next category I want to talk about is slow burn. If you are looking for more of a slow burn, less of the spice coming on strong in the book, you want to take your time. You want the characters to mingle, to get to know each other. You really, really want to be rooting for them, and you want the burn to go for a while. Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. I am reading this book right now and loving it. From what I know, I don't believe the romance really even kind of hits until the second book, so very slow burn. This is also a fae, but it's fae with like gods and goddesses. So we have like the gods and goddesses who mated with humans, and their offspring were what is considered the Fae. Fae here are called the Descended, and DM is our heroine. She's a healer. She gets called to help out the Descended royalty when some of the Descended children get injured. And from there, she's tumbling into a world of mystery. At the very beginning of the book, you find out that her mother is missing, so there is that mystery element, and it's really driving the plot, and I'm really excited to see where the romance goes because, like I said, it's a slow burn. Another very slow burn is a book by one of my favorite authors, and that is Sarah A. Parker, and this book is When the Moon Hatched. This is a very long book, and it is about Fae. Sarah A. Parker has a very flowery writing style, so if you like a flowery writing style and are okay with there being a lot of mystery in your fantasy romance, you might really like this one. She likes to drop you into the middle of the plot and have you try to figure out what happened in the beginning of the story. In this world, there's like 3 main sections, and Rave is our heroine. She is an assassin, and she is doing this job when her world is basically turned upside down. I don't want to say anything more because so much of the intrigue and exciting experience of the story is surrounding all of the mystery and learning all of the different elements of the plot for yourselves. So I don't want to ruin anything. Suffice it to say, this is definitely a slow burn. Okay, now let's get into some dark fantasy romance. Dark fantasy romance is basically a subgenre that mixes dark romance with fantasy romance. So we have darker elements, morally gray characters, probably a lot more trigger warnings, and things in general feel a little bit more hopeless. The first book I'm going to discuss is by the same author I was just talking about, one of my favorite fantasy romance authors, Sarah A. Parker, and this book is To Bleed a Crystal Bloom. This is a Rapunzel reimagining. Our heroine is in this tower. She's really scared of the outside world. What you find out is that when she was very much younger, she was saved by this man, this lord, when her whole family is murdered. She's in this tower now, scared of the whole world because of the trauma she's experienced as a child. And he's not necessarily holding her there, but he is taking a drop of her blood every single night. Obviously, there's a mystery surrounding why he's doing this. And this is also definitely a slow burn, like slow burn, but it's also darker, I would say, than When the Moon Hatched. From what I've noticed, a lot more people like When the Moon Hatched, but I actually personally still so far like To Bleed a Crystal Bloom and this series better. Maybe that's because there's 3 books out so far that I've already read, or maybe that's just because I like the dark aspects better. I love Orlaith, the main character. She goes through so much growth in this series. If you really like a character who starts at the bottom and feels very downtrodden and gets to experience a lot of character growth throughout this series, you might really like this one. Another dark fantasy romance series where the character really starts at the bottom, downtrodden, beaten down, having gone through so much trauma, and then experiences extreme character growth throughout the whole series, is the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy. This first book is called Guild, and this is a King Midas reimagining as well. So if you didn't already know, I really enjoy fairy tale reimaginings and retellings, so that's why there's been a few of these on this list. But you'll also find that it's a very popular theme in fantasy romance or romantasy. So like I said, this is a King Midas retelling. Our heroine has been gold touched by King Midas, so she is gold. Every single part of her, except for the whites of her eyes and her teeth, are gold. Her hair, her skin, her nails, everything. And she's being kept in this cage. She's like King Midas's pet. She's gone through a lot of trauma before meeting King Midas and with King Midas. This is a very slow burn as well. The romance doesn't even really start until the 3rd book. So another slow burn, but I thought it fit more in the dark romance category. You're going to see a lot of overlapping in this list. Some books are spicy and dark, some books are slow burn and dark, all that jazz. This is also a great book to read in winter because in this world, there's like 6 or 7 different realms. They're all different, but she is living in the super icy cold, wintry, snowy one. This is also one of my favorite fantasy romance series of all time. I'm hoping to read the 5th book this month. And as of recently, the series is now complete. So if you want to, you can binge the whole thing. Hey, so we've talked about hyped fantasy romance. Now, how about we talk about some underhyped fantasy romance? Obviously, there's more than these, but I can't really talk about more than a few books per category because this video would last forever. But I have to talk about Grace Draven. This book is Entreat Me, and this is a Beauty and the Beast reimagining where the Beast is actually the hero and his son, and the Beauty is actually the heroine's sister. So it's a kind of flipped on its head. It's really interesting and different. This is a very medieval fantasy world, and Grace Draven is such a good writer. This is spicy, but it's also a little bit slow burn too. I just don't hear enough people talking about Grace Draven or Entreat Me, and she is such a unique fantasy romance author. She doesn't really go by the mold or what's the most popular at the moment for fantasy romance. She is her own author that keeps with her own style, and I love that. I also love that we have a more mature hero and heroine, and the side characters in this book are really awesome because we do have that secondary romance. So our heroine finds out that her sister is like in love with this guy who is one of the beasts. She goes to kind of chaperone her sister, and she meets the dad of her sister's paramour. The two of them develop a romance, and they really want to try to break this curse that is affecting both the hero and his son. Like I said, she's totally flipped this fairy tale on its head, and I loved this book. Another one that involves an older heroine, and she's also plus size, so gotta love that, is Between Wrath and Mercy by Jess Weisskopf. This one, our heroine's daughter is the chosen one. So that's really kind of flipped everything on its head. When you look at a lot of fantasy romance books, there's like the chosen one trope. Well, in this one, the daughter is the chosen one, and she is hiding her daughter to keep her safe. One day, her husband and her daughter go missing. She has to recruit the help of her ex-boyfriend, who is a king, to rekindle a romance. So it is a second chance romance, which you really don't see a lot of in fantasy romance. Second chance romance, and she's trying to find her daughter, who's the chosen one. I love how unique this is. Don't worry, there's not really cheating in this. You'll find out why, and everything will make sense when you read this one, which please read this one. It is so good. It involves magic, so people are like magical, but it's not really like fae. So it's really unique in so many different ways. I think the 2nd and the 3rd book are out in the series, but it's going to be a quartet, so there is one more book left to be released. A very popular trope in fantasy romance is why choose, or what some people call reverse harem, or used to call reverse harem, but it's a little bit more politically correct to say why choose. This is Traitor Witch by Mary Mystery. She has a few different series, and some I haven't tried out yet that I really want to. She's a wonderful writer. I actually got to interview her on my channel, and that was so much fun. I can link that down below if you're interested. But this is about a witch, and the heroes in this are pirates. So in Why Choose books, the heroine does not have to choose between her love interests. So she ends up with a group of men. Sometimes Why Choose books are also polyamorous, so some of the men are also with each other. But in this one, this is strictly Why Choose. I believe that there are 5 heroes in this one, and there's shifters, there's a warlock, there's a vampire, there's a fae. All different kinds of magical beings in this book. Our witch is a lunar witch. One day, the queen of the solar witches and the queen of the lunar witches are unalived, and people think that she has done it. So she's kind of on the run, but also trying to solve the mystery. There's politics and a war, an uprising, and so much more to this series. It is action-packed, plot-driven, and there's spice, but it is definitely a slow burn. Like, there's not really much spice in this first book especially. I love Mary Mystery. I love this series. I highly recommend. I would also say Mary Mystery is on the underhyped side of things. Another Why Choose series that I really enjoyed was the Mate Games. The first book in the first Mate Games series is called Obsession. This is by Meg and Kay Lorraine. So it's an author duo, and this is really fun. It's paranormal too, and we have vampires and shifters. Our heroine is a shifter who has not been able to shift. She is sent to this academy where she meets her heroes, One is a Viking, two are vampires. One of the vampires is a teacher, and there is some like BDSM in here too. And then also one of the heroes is a shifter who she already knew was supposed to be her mate. This is a really cool series. This is a very spicy series, so it could definitely be put in the spicy category because man, this series is spicy. Really good, really fun. If you are looking just to cackle and laugh and have a joyous, fun time, check this one out. Okay, now let's talk about some cozy fantasy romance. I love cozy fantasy, and most cozy fantasy has a romance subplot. Now, these cozy fantasy romance books I'm going to discuss have a fantasy plot that is more than a subplot. I would say it's about equal to the cozy fantasy elements, or sometimes even like above them. Like definitely this is a romance. These are not spicy though, so just know that going in. These have romance, but there's not a bunch of spice or anything. The first one is Cursed Cocktails by S.L. Rowland. This is an MM fantasy romance cozy fantasy. There are some really cute animal companions in this. Our hero is a warlock and he is injured from serving in the military. So he goes to the south to try to heal some of his injuries. He wants to open a bar because he has this book from his father of all different cocktails from around the world from his father's travels. And he wants to try them and learn about them and sell them. And he meets a bartender and the two of them decide to open up a bar together, and they also have a romance. It is so cute. If you like Legends and Lattes, check this out because it's Legends and Lattes but MM and with a bar like instead of a coffee shop. It's so good, so cozy. I adored this one. One of my favorite books from last year was this cozy fantasy romance. It's The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, and this is a witchy cozy fantasy romance. Our heroine lives in a world where witches can't really congregate together because when their magic gets together, things get a little bit dangerous and unpredictable. She's living under the radar as a witchy, I think like a YouTuber basically. Like she's like a social media influencer pretending to be a witch, but she really is a witch. And she gets invited to this house that is housing 3 little witches that need a tutor. The hero is working at that house too as I believe like the librarian maybe, and the two of them have a romance. It is so good, so cozy. If you like witchy books and cozy books and you haven't picked this one up, please read it. It is so sweet. I love the found family and the little girls in this book are so awesome. It's so good. And finally, probably my favorite T. Kingfisher book is Sword Heart. So if you've heard of T. Kingfisher, you know she writes a lot of like fairy tale retellings and horror books too. This is not a retelling necessarily, but our heroine in here is being locked in a room because her husband has passed away. She's supposed to be inheriting her husband's uncle's or aunt's estate, and their family is not very happy about it, so they've locked her in her room, and there's a sword on the wall, and she's like, well, I guess I'm just gonna unalive myself. She unsheaths the sword and a man pops out. So almost like a genie in a bottle, but not. Anyway, now he is oath-bound to protect her. He gets her out of the house and they go on a quest to find a lawyer. It is so cozy and fun and cute and quirky. T. Kingfisher knows how to bring like cute, quirky to fantasy books. I adored this one. Okay, next let's talk about paranormal. So a lot of people talk about paranormal romance, but I would say it's definitely under the umbrella of fantasy romance if you're talking about fantasy romance as the speculative romance subgenre. So paranormal romance involves vampires, werewolves, shifters, and witches, I would say, are like the main kind of aspects of paranormal books. If you think like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that's definitely like a paranormal TV series. So here I have Slaying the Vampire by Caressa Broadbent. Our heroine in here is magical and she belongs to maybe even like a cult, you could call it. She is an assassin and she's sent to unalive the vampire conqueror who's coming for her kingdom. And she goes to do that, but the two of them fall in love instead. It's so good. There's vampires and magic and a badass heroine. This girl is so powerful. It's so good. I love the banter. I just love the writing and the adventure. This is a standalone too, so it's a one and done, which is often hard to find with fantasy romance. Another standalone where you get the HEA at the end that's also a paranormal is my most recent read, and that was Phantasma by Kaylee Smith. This is a Caraval meets Ninth House. So Caraval is a YA trilogy by Stephanie Garber. Ninth House is like an adult dark academia fantasy, and I feel like this is a mix between the two, but add in a whole lot of spice. This book is spicy. So in this world, our heroine is a necromancer, and she can see ghosts and different spectrums and ghouls and all kinds of things like that. And she has to enter this contest called Phantasma to save her sister. Her sister has entered it and she doesn't know why. So there's some mysteries to unveil, and there she meets this ghost, and the two of them have a romance. It is so cool. Like I said, there's like ghosts and ghouls, there's demons. She's a necromancer, so it's very paranormal, very spicy, and a standalone. I had a lot of fun with this one. It's also very dark, so make sure you check the triggers before going into it. Another really awesome paranormal fantasy romance is The Coven by Harper L. Woods. This is a duology. So the first book is The Coven, and I can't remember the name of the second book, but this is about witches, and our heroine has plant magic, and she has been trying to hide from like the witch culture, but she gets pulled into it when her mother passes away, and she shows up at this school where the headmaster is a vampire, and the two of them develop a relationship. So this is like a forbidden headmaster student teacher kind of relationship, but it's a whole lot more than that as well. Very spicy, perfect for spooky season, but also just all year round whenever you're in the mood for a paranormal book. I love the like witchy magic she has where she can like grow plants and bring life back to things. It's so fun, and I like that this also has kind of a different take on vampires. Okay, my last two categories are monster and alien romance books. Usually I consider these like separate too, kind of how paranormal is like a separate category, but like I said, we're talking about the umbrella of fantasy romance as speculative romance. I really enjoy monster romances, especially that are cozy, that kind of mix the cozy vibes too. So that's a lot of what I have for you today for the monster romance and for the alien romance. But the first one here is The Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert. This is part of a series by Katie Robert where women sign up to be married to monsters in this other realm for like a certain period of time. And when they do that, they kind of get to escape a lot of issues they're having in their life, and they kind of get to have whatever they want when they go back to the human realm. So she marries this dragon. There's a lot of safety precautions put into place. She's not harmed. She's not mistreated. She's treated very well. The dragon is actually a cinnamon roll. Like, he's so flipping sweet, but it's a huge size difference. So if you like size difference romances, check this one out. He's also got two. That's all I'm going to say about that one. He's got two. It can get very spicy and interesting for sure. The next recommendation I have is a recent read, and that is The Orc and the Innkeeper by Cora Crane. And this is a very cozy fantasy romance where our hero is an orc. He owns a brewery. Our heroine, she owns an inn. The two of them end up fake dating. This is in a very cute, cozy fantasy village where there's humans and there's magical creatures and monsters, all kinds of different beings. And this is also an enemies to lovers, so there's a lot of groveling because our orc actually bullied the heroine in high school. So if you like groveling, this one has it. Another monster romance that actually involves mermaids is by Emma Hamm, who's a well-known fantasy romance author. This is Whispers in the Deep. This is the first book in a trilogy where each book follows a different couple, so you get an HEA with each one. In this world, humans are living underwater. It's kind of almost futuristic or dystopian. They've destroyed the world up above water, so now they're going to destroy the world below water. They're living in these like domes underwater on the floor of the ocean, and obviously the mermaids aren't too happy about it. So they are mortal enemies. The hero is like the head warrior of like the military for these mermaids, and he kidnaps the heroine one day, and it is a romance between the two of them. So definitely enemies to lovers, and it's really fun because it's mermaids. So if you're interested in trying like some underwater type of monster romance, this is a good one. Finally, I have 3 alien romance books to discuss. The first one is Taken to Veraxia by Elizabeth Stevens. This follows our heroine who is on this moon where her and the other women here are being awfully mistreated, and they're being forced to partake in this run or game that basically ends in SA. And the hero, who is in charge of like the galactic empire of this area, goes there and finds out what's happening in here. And he also discovers the heroine, who he immediately senses and smells as his mate. So this is a very much like a women coming into their power and righting wrongs, and it might be the perfect book for this time. Feminine rage, and also a really interesting romance that involves them, the hero and the heroine, really having to work on communication for sure. I loved this one. It said so much, and it was very interesting. It was also very, very, very spicy, and you really believe the steam and the connection between the characters. Next is Desire in His Blood. Now you can actually call this paranormal maybe because the hero is a vampire, but he's also a berserker, but he's also an alien. So our heroine, she ends up having to marry him to cover her father's debts. So it's an arranged marriage, enemies to lovers. He hates her because he hates her father, who has wronged him. You don't know why or how or why like he hates her and what her father has done to him. You just know that that's the case. He wants to marry her just to make her life miserable. Unfortunately, when he drinks her blood, he discovers that she is his mate. So the two of them develop a relationship from there. So enemies to lovers, vampire themed, but alien. It feels very fantasy romance. So if you like fantasy romance and you want to try out the alien romance subgenre, this might be a good way to enter into that. Finally, I can't talk about alien romance without discussing IPB. I'm a huge fan of the Ice Planet Barbarian's World by Ruby Dixon. I've read the first, 11 or 12 books in the series. I'm still continuing on. Ruby Dixon just writes fun, immersive fantasy romance and alien romance books, and IPB is just that. Definitely check your triggers before going into this, especially the first book has a lot of triggers like SA. Our heroines have been abducted by these mean, nasty aliens, and then they crash land on this planet where they discover this other race of aliens who kind of saves them, and they discover mating bonds with them. They are these big blue aliens. They have tails. They have spurs. I'm not going to tell you what that means, but it's a good time. I love this series. Love Ruby Dixon. If you want to try out alien romance, I think this is a great place to start. This is where a lot of people start. They now have these really cool covers that you can get at the store. These are like new editions that have these really beautiful covers that I adore. So there you have it. That is my ultimate guide to fantasy romance, all about the creatures, the subgenres, the tropes, all of that good stuff. I hope you guys liked this video. I hope you liked my 25 recommendations for different types of fantasy romance books for you to check out. If you like this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, fellow readers, keep reading and living your best life.
Said you felt that way, and guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away.